The independence of Mexico was the consequence of a political and a social progress resolved with arms, which put an end to Spanish rule in most of the territories of New Spain and gave rise to the first Mexican Empire. The loss of these possessions had a decisive importance for the economy of the Spanish Empire, since Mexican income represented 80% of the total American flows at the end of the colonial period. The War for Mexican Independence began on the 19th of September 1810 until the entry of the Trigarant Army to Mexico City on September 27, 1821. The Mexican independence movement is framed by the Enlightenment and the liberal revolutions of the latter part of the 18th century. At that time, the enlightened elite began to reflect on the ideas of popular sovereignty and the relations between peninsular Spain and the rest of the empire. The changes in the social and political structure derived from the Bourbon reforms, to which was added a deep economic crisis in New Spain, also generate unease among some segments of the populations. The French occupation of the metropolis in 1908 triggered a political crisis in New Spain that led to the armed movement. In that year, King Carlos IV and Fernando VII successively abdicated in favor of Napoleon Bonaparte, who left the crown of Spain to his brother José Bonaparte. In response, the City Council of Mexico, with the support of Viceroy José de Iturbide, claimed sovereignty in the absence of the legitimate king. The reaction led to a coup against the Viceroy and sent the leaders of the movement to jail. Despite the defeat of the Criollos in Mexico City in 1908, small groups of conspirators met in other cities of New Spain and tried to follow in the footsteps of the Mexican City Council. Such was the case of the Valladolid conspiracy, discovered in 1909, and whose participants were put in prison. In 1910, the conspirators of Querétaro were about to suffer the same fate, but when they were discovered, they chose to take up arms on September 16, in the company of the indigenous and peasant inhabitants of the town of Dolores, Guanajuato, some by the pirates Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. Starting in 1910, the independence movement went through various stages depending on the military status of the insurgency, and successive leaders when defeated, captured, and imprisoned or executed by force loyal of Spain. At first, popular sovereignty was claimed, but Ferdinand VII was recognized as king of Spain and its colonies. Then the leaders later assumed more radical positions, including social issues such as the abolition of slavery. José María Morelos y Pavón summoned the independent province to form the Anáhuac Congress, which proclaimed independence from the throne of Spain, dissolved forever, and claimed all the sovereignty and its own legal framework. After the defeat of Morelos, the movement was reduced to a guerrilla war. Around 1820, only a few rebel nuclei remained, especially in the Sierra Madre del Sur and Veracruz. In 1820, another liberal revolution in Spain from the pronouncement of Riego to subdue the despotic government of Fernando VII and restore the Constitution of Cádiz. Seeing their interests affected, the Creoles decided to support an independent monarchy in New Spain, for which they sought the support of the insurgent resistance. Agustín de Iturbide led the military arm of the conspirators, and in early 1821 he was able to meet Vicente Guerrero. The Plan of Iguala was proclaimed, which called for a meeting of all the insurgent factions and had the support of the aristocracy and clergy of New Spain. A timid and ill-advised reaction by Viceroy Apodaca provoked the military disarray and determined the change of position of the New Spain elites, that only they had support Spanish rule. Finally, the independence of Mexico was consummated on September 27, 1821. In this way, New Spain became the Mexican Empire, an ephemeral independent monarchy that, after a revolution, gave way to a federal republic in 1823, between internal conflicts and the separation of Central America. After putting an end to the resistance of the fortress of San Juan de Ulúa, Veracruz, among other episodes of Reconquista attempts, including the expedition of Isidro Barradas in 1829, Spain recognized the independence of Mexico in 1836, after the death of the monarch Fernando VII. Some of the consequences of the independence of Mexico are the beginning of the colony and the beginning of the Mexican Empire, the abolition of slavery, text and sealed paper, the end of caste society, the war between Mexico and the United States, and the frustration of the hopes of distribution of wealth. Those were some of the consequences of the independence of Mexico. In addition to the fact that Mexico would be different and we have not become independent. And well, this was the historical documentary about the independence of Mexico, where we saw the causes, the development, and the consequence of this. My name is Fabián, and this was the independence of Mexico.